For the last 6 months, my husband has been my eyes. He guided me downstairs, read my mail, signed documents for my convenience, tucked blankets around my shoulders at night, and kissed my forehead before switching off the lights. Everyone called him devoted. Everyone said I was lucky. What nobody knew was that the accident that stole my sight had also stolen my ability to trust. And what my husband definitely didn't know was that 3 weeks ago, in a private clinic 300 miles away, a surgeon removed the final bandages from my eyes. And I could see perfectly. I saw my husband holding another woman's hand in my garden. I saw that woman wearing my late mother's pearl necklace. I saw them laughing while discussing how long it would take before I became less of a problem. For 21 days, I pretended to remain blind. For 21 days, I listened, watched, recorded, waited. Tonight was the last night they believed I couldn't see. And tomorrow morning, one of us would lose everything. It wasn't gonna be me.
The year darkness entered my life began with champagne. That's the detail I remember most clearly. Not the screaming tires. Not the flashing ambulance lights. Not the doctors. The champagne. Because 3 hours before the accident, my husband Derek had insisted we celebrate. To your mother's legacy, he said, lifting his glass across the dining table. The crystal chandelier reflected in the golden liquid. I smiled and raised mine. At the time, I thought he was celebrating the final transfer of my trust fund. After years of legal procedures, my inheritance had finally become fully accessible. Several $1,000,000. Properties. Investments. A lifetime of security. My mother had built it carefully before cancer took her away. Derek smiled all evening. Too much, now that I think about it. At the time I found it charming. Looking back, I think he was relieved. Relieved because he believed he was finally close to owning everything. The accident happened on a rainy stretch of highway outside Charleston. At least that's what everyone told me. The official story never changed. A truck lost control. Our vehicle spun. Metal twisted. Glass shattered. I suffered severe injuries and damage to my optic nerves. Derek escaped with minor cuts. The doctors called it tragic. The newspapers called it unfortunate. The insurance company called it unavoidable. For months afterward, I called it bad luck. Until the questions started appearing. Small questions. The kind that quietly settle inside your mind and refuse to leave. Why had Derek insisted on driving that specific route? Why had he repeatedly asked about clauses in my inheritance before the accident? Why did several longtime employees disappear almost immediately after I lost my sight? Why did every answer feel rehearsed? Blindness changes relationships. People think the hardest part is losing vision. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the hardest part is discovering who people become when they think you can't see them. At first Derek appeared perfect. Attentive. Patient. Gentle. He described sunsets to me. Read novels aloud. Helped me count my medication. If a stranger observed us, they would have thought I had married a saint. But small cracks began appearing. He started managing every conversation. Every appointment. Every financial decision. When lawyers called, he answered. When bankers requested meetings, he attended alone. When I asked questions, answers became shorter. Vaguer. More dismissive. Don't worry about that. I've handled it. You should focus on healing. Healing. The word became a cage. One afternoon I overheard something that changed everything. Derek thought I was asleep. His voice drifted from the hallway. Soft. Careless. Unfiltered. She's not asking many questions anymore. A woman laughed quietly. A woman. Inside my house. Inside my hallway. Inside the home my mother had left me. Good, she replied. Because eventually she'll stop asking completely. I still remember how cold my hands felt beneath the blanket. At the time I didn't know who she was. I only knew she sounded comfortable. Far too comfortable. Like someone who belonged there. A week later, my childhood friend Claire arrived unexpectedly. Claire had known me since second grade. She was the kind of friend who noticed details other people missed. The kind of woman who could hear a lie before the sentence ended. When Derek left the room, Claire squeezed my hand. Hard. Too hard for a casual greeting. Something was wrong. I could feel it. Are you alone? She whispered. Yes. A long silence followed. Then she said something that altered the course of my life. I think your accident wasn't an accident. The room became perfectly still. Even the grandfather clock seemed to stop ticking. I lowered my voice. Why? Claire hesitated. I hired someone. My stomach tightened. A private investigator. The words landed like stones. She explained everything slowly. Carefully. There had been irregularities. Phone records. Financial transfers. Conversations between Derek and individuals connected to vehicle maintenance. Nothing definitive. Nothing that would stand up in court. But enough to create suspicion. Enough to terrify her. And enough to convince her that my blindness might not have been the outcome Derek expected. It might have been the goal. I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. Questions circled endlessly through my mind. Memories began rearranging themselves. Conversations sounded different. Smiles looked different in memory. Even Derek's kindness started feeling staged. Like a performance designed for an audience of one. Me. The blind wife. The grieving daughter. The convenient obstacle. 3 weeks later Claire returned. This time with a proposal. Dangerous. Illegal in some ways. Necessary in others. There is a specialist, she said. He believes your condition might be treatable. Hope is a strange thing. After enough disappointment, it becomes painful. I didn't want hope. I wanted certainty. But certainty wasn't available. Only possibility. And possibility was enough. Under a false name, we traveled to another city. No announcements. No paperwork connected to my estate. No information Derek could trace. For the first time in months, I stepped into a world where nobody knew who I was. Or what I owned. Or who was waiting for me back home. The surgery happened on a gray Tuesday morning. I remember the antiseptic smell. The quiet voices. The weight of fear pressing against my chest. The surgeon never promised success. He promised effort. Sometimes that's all honesty can offer. When I woke afterward, everything remained dark. Hours passed. Then days. Bandages covered my eyes. Doctors checked progress. Nobody revealed much. Not even Claire. Especially not Claire. I think she was more nervous than I was. Then came the morning. The morning everything changed. A nurse guided me into a chair near a window. Sunlight warmed my face. The surgeon stood beside me. Claire held my hand. Nobody spoke. The room felt suspended in time. Carefully, the final bandage was removed. For a moment. Nothing. Then light. A blur of shapes. Colors. Movement. The world returned slowly. As though reality itself was waking up. I blinked. Again. And again. The surgeon's face sharpened. The window. The walls. Claire. Tears streamed down her cheeks before I realized tears were streaming down mine. The first person I saw after months of darkness was my oldest friend. And the expression on her face wasn't joy. It was relief. Pure relief. Because she had been carrying a secret fear. The fear that she might be too late. 3 hours later, sitting in a quiet hotel room, Claire asked the question neither of us wanted to ask. What are you going to do now? I stared out the window. At moving cars. At people crossing streets. At ordinary life. For the first time in months, I could see everything. And suddenly I realized something. Seeing wasn't the advantage. Being underestimated was. Derek believed I was blind. His mistress believed I was blind. Anyone helping them believed I was blind. They were comfortable. Careless. Confident. People reveal themselves when they think nobody is watching. And for the first time, I was watching. A slow chill moved through me. Not anger. Not revenge. Something colder. Something calmer. A decision. I turned toward Claire. I'm going home. She frowned. Without telling him? Yes. And you're going to pretend you're still blind? I looked directly into her eyes. The first direct eye contact I'd made in months. And I said the words that would begin the most dangerous 3 weeks of my life. I need to know how far they're willing to go. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the city. Inside that hotel room, a plan quietly came to life. Because if Derek had truly stolen my future, then before this was over, I intended to watch him destroy his own. When I returned home, the hardest part wasn't pretending to be blind. It was pretending not to react. The black SUV rolled through the front gates just after sunset. For months, this house had existed only as a memory in my mind. Now I could see it again. The white stone facade. The ivy climbing the eastern wall. The fountain my mother had installed 20 years earlier. Everything looked familiar. And completely different. Because now I knew what was hiding inside it. Derek opened my passenger door. His face appeared before me for the first time in 7 months. I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he'd changed. Because I had. The version of him living in my memories was a loving husband. The man standing in front of me now was a stranger wearing that husband's face. He reached for my hand. Careful, sweetheart. His voice sounded warm. Concerned. Practiced. I lowered my eyes behind the dark glasses and allowed him to guide me toward the front entrance. Every instinct screamed at me to pull away. Instead, I smiled. Did you miss me? A tiny pause. Barely noticeable. Every second. The lie arrived effortlessly. That frightened me more than anything. Inside, I nearly exposed myself. The foyer looked different. Several paintings were missing. Furniture had been rearranged. A marble sculpture that once belonged to my mother had vanished completely. I knew every inch of this house. Yet somehow it felt like I was entering a stranger's property. My property. And someone had been redecorating my life. I forced myself not to stare. Not to react. Not to reveal that I could see everything. Instead, I allowed my hand to brush lightly across a hallway table. A performance. A role. The blind wife had returned home. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then 7. Every hour required concentration. I had to remember which version of myself people believed. I counted steps. Pretended to search for door handles. Purposely reached a few inches too far when picking up cups. At night, alone in my bedroom, I would remove the dark glasses and walk through the room in silence. Practicing. Preparing. Watching. Always watching. Because the truth was revealing itself faster than I expected. The woman from the hallway finally appeared. Officially. Not as Derek's mistress. Not according to him. According to Derek, she was a temporary guest. A friend. Someone going through a difficult divorce. Someone who needed support. Her name was Vanessa. She was 34. Elegant. Beautiful. And entirely too comfortable inside my home. I noticed it immediately. People reveal ownership through tiny behaviors. She opened kitchen cabinets without hesitation. Used my coffee machine without asking. Gave instructions to household staff. Sat in my mother's favorite chair. Not once. Repeatedly. Like she was trying it on for size. The first time I saw her wearing my mother's pearls, I nearly lost control. The necklace had been kept inside a private safe for years. My mother wore it only on important occasions. Christmas. Anniversaries. Family weddings. Now Vanessa sat across from me at breakfast wearing it casually with a cream-colored sweater. As though she had purchased it herself. As though it belonged to her. My fingers tightened around my coffee cup. Vanessa smiled. "Do you like the necklace?" For one terrifying second, I thought she knew. Thought she had somehow discovered the truth. Then I understood. She was mocking me. Testing me. Enjoying herself. Derek shifted slightly beside her. Waiting. Watching. Both of them expecting the blind woman to remain unaware. I tilted my head. "It sounds beautiful." Vanessa laughed softly. The sound followed me for hours. By the second week, I realized something worse than betrayal was happening. They weren't simply stealing money. They were erasing me. Piece by piece. Memory by memory. Staff members who had worked for my family for decades were gone. The groundskeeper my father hired was gone. My mother's longtime assistant was gone. The housekeeper who helped raise me was gone. In their place stood strangers. Every replacement seemed loyal to Derek. Not to me. Not to the estate. Not to the family. To him. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had happened gradually. Quietly. The way invasions often do. One afternoon, I sat in the library pretending to listen to an audiobook. In reality, I was observing reflections through the dark lenses of my glasses. Vanessa entered. Derek followed. Neither realized I could see them. The room smelled faintly of leather-bound books and fresh rain drifting through a cracked window. Vanessa wrapped her arms around his neck. Right there. In my library. In my house. 10 feet from where I sat. "How much longer?" she asked. Derek glanced toward me. I remained motionless. Not much. My pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" Vanessa asked. He lowered his voice. Too low. I couldn't hear the answer. But I saw her smile. And that smile chilled me. Because it wasn't the smile of someone planning a future. It was the smile of someone waiting for an obstacle to disappear. That night I called Claire. Using a private phone hidden inside an old sewing box. We spoke in whispers. Things are worse than we thought. I told her everything. The necklace. The behavior. The conversations. The missing employees. The atmosphere. The way everyone seemed to be waiting for something. When I finished, silence filled the line. Then Claire said, "We need evidence. Not suspicions. Not instincts. Evidence. Something undeniable. Something police could use. Something lawyers couldn't dismiss." And she already had an idea. 3 days later, a package arrived. Officially, it was a new accessibility device. A Braille note-taker recommended for visually impaired users. Derek approved the purchase immediately. Of course he did. Why would he worry about a device for a blind woman? What he didn't know was that the device had been modified. Hidden inside it was a miniature camera. Audio recorder. Encrypted transmitter. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unrealistic. Just enough technology to document conversations. And enough storage to preserve the truth. For the first time since my surgery, I felt something close to confidence. Not because I had power. Because I finally had a witness. The recording started slowly. Small things. Careless comments. Financial discussions. References to transfers and accounts. Mentions of properties being prepared for sale. None of it criminal. Not yet. But the pattern was becoming clear. Derek wasn't protecting my estate. He was positioning himself to control it. Every decision pointed toward the same destination. Ownership. Complete ownership. Then came the conversation. The one that changed everything. The one that made my blood run cold. It happened on a Thursday evening. A storm rolled across the coastline. Thunder rattled distant windows. I sat in the sunroom pretending to read Braille notes. The recording device rested beside my hand. Derek and Vanessa entered from the terrace. They believed I couldn't hear them clearly over the rain. They were wrong. Very wrong. Vanessa poured herself wine. Derek loosened his tie. Then she asked a question. A simple question. A terrifying question. What if she changes the will? The room became silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. Derek's expression hardened. I had never seen that face before. No warmth. No affection. No concern. Only calculation. She won't. But if she does? He looked toward the dark windows. Then toward me. Toward the woman he thought was helpless. His answer came quietly. Almost casually. "We'll handle it." Vanessa stared at him. "What does that mean?" Another silence. Longer this time. Then Derek said something that made my stomach twist. "It means she won't be around long enough for it to matter." The thunder outside crashed so loudly it nearly covered the words. Nearly. But not completely. The recorder captured every syllable. Every pause. Every implication. I sat perfectly still. Heart pounding. Hand steady. Years of emotional control saved me in that moment. Because inside, panic was rising. Not fear for my money. Not fear for the house. Fear for my life. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just greed. It wasn't just betrayal. It had evolved into something darker. Something irreversible. And somewhere deep inside me, another realization surfaced. If Derek was willing to discuss my future that way, then he was already planning it. The question wasn't whether he intended to act. The question was when. And I had a feeling the answer was coming sooner than anyone expected. The next morning, I woke to find someone standing beside my bed. Watching me. completely silent. My eyes remained closed. My breathing stayed slow. But every nerve in my body came alive. Someone was there. Waiting. Observing. Testing. And in that terrifying moment, I realized my most dangerous performance was only beginning. Because whoever stood beside my bed wasn't checking on me. They were checking whether the blind woman could still keep a secret. And if I made even the smallest mistake, everything would be over. The figure beside my bed didn't move. Not immediately. The bedroom remained silent except for the distant hum of the air conditioner and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I kept my eyes closed. Every instinct urged me to react. To open my eyes. To confront whoever was standing there. Instead, I stayed perfectly still. Waiting. Listening. Surviving. Then a faint click broke the silence. A flashlight. Even through my closed eyelids, I sensed the brightness sweeping across my face. Slowly. Carefully. Testing. My pulse hammered against my ribs. But years of discipline saved me. I remained motionless. The beam lingered on my eyes. 1 second. 2. 3. Then disappeared. A few moments later, soft footsteps crossed the room. The door opened. Closed. And whoever had entered was gone. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. Because I already knew who it had been. Derek. And for the first time, I understood something important. He was becoming nervous. Very nervous. The next morning, he acted as though nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead. Asked how I slept. Poured my coffee. The performance was flawless. Almost. But now that I could see him, I noticed things blindness had hidden. The slight tension around his mouth. The dark circles beneath his eyes. The way his attention kept drifting toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. He wasn't relaxed anymore. He was watching me. Which meant my advantage was shrinking. That afternoon, I sat alone in the library reviewing recorded files from the Braille device. Hours of conversations. Financial discussions. Property transfers. References to offshore accounts. The evidence was growing. But not yet enough. Not enough to expose everything. Not enough to stop them permanently. I needed them to reveal their intentions clearly. And people reveal the most when they believe they've already won. That realization gave me an idea. A risky one. The kind that could either accelerate their mistakes. Or expose mine. 3 days later, I made my first move. A small one. Barely noticeable. The kind that slips beneath the surface of ordinary life. While everyone was outside preparing for a dinner party, I entered Derek's study. For months he believed I couldn't even locate the room alone. Now I stood inside it. Seeing everything. His desk. His computer. The framed photographs. The locked filing cabinet. I didn't touch anything important. Instead, I selected a book from the shelf. A true crime book discussing inheritance murders. I opened it to a chapter describing poisoning cases. Then left it face up on his desk. Perfectly visible. Perfectly impossible. For a blind woman. That evening I listened carefully. The reaction came faster than expected. Vanessa entered the study first. A few seconds later, Derek followed. Their voices carried through the hallway. "Did you leave this here?" Vanessa asked. "No." A pause. "Then who did?" More silence. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that grows larger the longer nobody speaks. Finally Derek laughed. But the laugh sounded forced. "Probably staff." Vanessa didn't sound convinced. Neither was I. The seed had been planted. Tiny. Harmless. But seeds have a way of growing. Especially inside guilty minds. Over the next week, I repeated the process. Never dramatically. Never obviously. Just enough to create uncertainty. One morning Vanessa's favorite shoes appeared in the wrong hallway. Not hidden. Not stolen. Simply moved. She tripped over them while carrying laundry. The fall bruised her knee and embarrassed her in front of staff. Another afternoon a framed photograph disappeared from a shelf and reappeared in a guest room. A week later, a document Derek believed he had locked away appeared on top of his desk. Nothing criminal. Nothing dangerous. Just impossible. At least impossible according to the reality they believed existed. A reality where I couldn't see. The changes began affecting them. Especially Vanessa. She started glancing over her shoulder. Checking empty rooms. Pausing in hallways. One evening I heard her arguing with Derek near the kitchen. The voices were low but tense. This house feels wrong. Stop. I'm serious. You sound ridiculous. No, Derek. Things keep moving. You know exactly who's moving them. A pause followed. Then Vanessa whispered. You don't think. The sentence never finished. She didn't need to finish it. Fear had already completed it for her. Derek wasn't frightened. Not yet. But he was becoming suspicious. Which made him dangerous. One night I noticed him standing in the doorway of the dining room watching me. Not speaking. Just observing. Studying. Evaluating. As though trying to solve a puzzle. I lowered my gaze and continued pretending to search for my water glass. Eventually he walked away. But something had changed. The blind wife no longer felt predictable to him. And unpredictability creates anxiety. The real danger arrived a few nights later. Just after midnight. I woke to the sensation of someone entering the room again. This time I was prepared. My breathing remained slow. Steady. Controlled. The footsteps approached. Closer. Closer. Then stopped beside the bed. Another flashlight clicked on. Only this time the beam remained fixed directly on my face. Longer than before. Much longer. I felt the warmth through my eyelids. Seconds stretched endlessly. Then something worse happened. A hand gently lifted one of my eyelids. My entire body screamed. Every muscle wanted to react. To blink. To pull away. To survive. Instead I forced myself into stillness. Absolute stillness. The flashlight remained focused on my eye. Testing my pupil response. Searching for proof. Searching for betrayal. Searching for the truth. The moment lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It felt like 10 years. Finally the hand released me. The light vanished. The footsteps retreated. And the bedroom door closed. I waited another 5 minutes before moving. My nightgown was soaked with sweat. For the first time since recovering my vision, I felt genuine fear. Not fear of being caught. Fear of what Derek might do if he discovered he had been deceived. The next morning Claire nearly shouted when I told her. He tested you? Yes. That's not normal. No. It means he's worried. I stared through the kitchen window toward the ocean. The waves crashed against distant rocks. Calm on the surface. Violent underneath. Exactly like my life. He's preparing for something. Claire fell silent. Because she knew I was right. And so did I. That evening I reviewed the latest recordings. One particular conversation stood out. Vanessa sounded impatient. Almost desperate. How much longer? Again that question. Always that question. Derek answered differently this time. Soon. What does soon mean? Very soon. His tone chilled me. Not because it was angry. Because it was calm. The calmness of a person who believes a decision has already been made. I realized then that waiting carried its own risks. Every day increased the danger. Every day gave Derek more opportunities. More options. More confidence. If they were planning something permanent, I needed to accelerate their timeline. Force them into action before they were ready. Force them into making mistakes. Force them into revealing themselves completely. The idea came to me while sitting in my mother's old garden. The same garden where she taught me to ride a bicycle. The same garden where Derek once proposed. Funny how betrayal often grows in places that once held love. The following afternoon, I casually mentioned something during lunch. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple statement. The kind that sounds insignificant until you understand the consequences. I reached for my tea and said, I have an appointment tomorrow. Derek looked up. What kind of appointment? I smiled softly. With my attorney. The effect was immediate. Vanessa froze. Only for a second. But I saw it. Derek set down his fork. Why? I shrugged. My estate planning. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles over a room before a storm. Then I added the sentence that changed everything. I think it's time I update my will. Nobody spoke. Not right away. The dining room suddenly felt smaller. The air heavier. Even the staff seemed uncomfortable. Derek recovered first. That's a big decision. I know. Shouldn't we discuss it together? No. The word landed softly. But firmly. For the first time in months, I denied him something. And he noticed. I could see it in his eyes. The calculation. The concern. The panic hidden beneath composure. That night, after everyone believed I had gone to bed, I sat silently in darkness listening through the recording feed. Hours passed. Then finally. Voices. Derek and Vanessa. Alone. Tense. Afraid. Exactly where I wanted them. What if she changes everything? Vanessa whispered. She won't. How do you know? A long pause followed. Then Derek answered. And the moment I heard his response, I knew the trap had worked. Because his next words confirmed exactly what I had suspected. Tomorrow no longer fit into their plans. They had decided that whatever happened needed to happen tonight. And somewhere downstairs, hidden inside my so-called Braille device, every word was being recorded. Every lie. Every conspiracy. Every step toward their downfall. What neither of them realized was that they weren't preparing a trap for me anymore. They were walking directly into one. And by the time the sun rose, someone would finally be looking the truth straight in the eye. The house felt different that night. Not louder. Not quieter. Heavier. As though every wall knew something was about to happen. I sat alone in my bedroom, the dark glasses resting on the vanity table beside me. Moonlight spilled across the hardwood floor. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply look. Really look. At the room that had once been my sanctuary. My mother's portrait above the fireplace. The bookshelves she helped design. The antique clock she inherited from her father. So much of her still lived inside this house. And that realization hurt. Because Derek hadn't just tried to steal my fortune. He had tried to erase the last pieces of her. The inheritance was never about money. It was memory, family, legacy, love. And tonight, that legacy would finally defend itself. At 7:12 p.m., Claire texted a single word. Ready. 3 attorneys were monitoring the evidence remotely. 2 detectives were listening through a secured live feed. Every recording had already been copied to multiple locations. Every document had been backed up. Even if something happened to me tonight, the truth would survive. For the first time in over a year, I felt safe. Not because danger had disappeared. Because I was no longer facing it alone. At exactly 8 o'clock, Derek knocked on my door. "Dinner is ready." His voice sounded calm. Almost cheerful. I wondered if he had practiced it. "Thank you," I replied. The man who wanted my life was still pretending to care about my appetite. Human beings are fascinating that way. They often cling to normal routines right before everything falls apart. The dining room glowed beneath soft amber light. Crystal glasses sparkled. Silverware reflected candle flames. The table looked beautiful. Almost festive. Like a celebration. In a strange way, it was. Just not the celebration Derek expected. Vanessa sat across from me. She wore a dark green dress. And my mother's pearls. Again. That detail no longer made me angry. It made me sad. Because she still believed she would leave this house with them. Dinner began normally. Too normally. Small talk. Weather. Business headlines. Local events. Nobody mentioned wills. Nobody mentioned lawyers. Nobody mentioned the future. But beneath every sentence flowed another conversation entirely. A hidden one. A dangerous one. Everyone at the table knew something significant was coming. The only difference was that Derek and Vanessa thought they controlled it. Halfway through dinner, wine was served. I watched carefully. Very carefully. A brief glance passed between them. Tiny. Almost invisible. But not invisible enough. Vanessa adjusted her napkin. Derek touched the stem of his glass. A signal. The kind developed through repetition. The kind people don't realize they're making. I noticed something else. A specific glass had been placed directly beside my plate. Prepared before I entered. Waiting. For me. The realization settled over me with chilling clarity. This was it. The final move. The final plan. The final mistake. My heartbeat remained steady. Months earlier I would have panicked. Tonight I simply observed. Because observation had become my greatest weapon. I waited. Listened. Watched. Then Derek raised his glass. To new beginnings. Vanessa smiled. To the future. I nearly laughed. The future. They had no idea what theirs looked like anymore. I reached toward the table. Slowly. Like a blind woman locating her drink. Derek relaxed. Vanessa relaxed. Both assumed I was reaching for the glass they intended me to take. Instead, I deliberately picked up Vanessa's wine glass. The wrong glass. Her glass. The room instantly froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For the first time all evening, genuine fear appeared on Vanessa's face. I held the glass calmly, examining the deep red liquid. Then I lifted my eyes. Not vaguely. Not accidentally. Directly. Straight into hers. And I said, "That color doesn't suit you." The silence that followed felt endless. Vanessa's face drained of color. The wineglass nearly slipped from her fingers. Derek stared at me, completely motionless. His expression shifted through confusion, recognition, then horror. Pure horror. Because he finally understood. I could see. I had been seeing. For weeks. Maybe months. Every lie. Every secret. Every betrayal. Seen. Diana. His voice cracked. The sound almost surprised me. For so long he had seemed untouchable. Now he sounded frightened. Human. Small. I removed the dark glasses. Slowly. Placed them on the table. Then looked directly at him. The first true eye contact we'd shared in nearly a year. You should have left my mother out of this. Nobody spoke. Not even Vanessa. The room had become a courtroom. And they both knew it. Derek stood abruptly. What is this? His confidence was gone. The performance had ended. Now only panic remained. I reached into my purse. Pressed a button on a small remote. Across the room, the massive television screen illuminated. The first video appeared immediately. Audio filled the dining room. Vanessa's voice. Clear. Undeniable. What if she changes the will? Then Derek. Calm. Cold. It means she won't be around long enough for it to matter. The color vanished from his face. Vanessa covered her mouth. The recording continued. Conversation after conversation. Date after date. Financial discussions. Inheritance plans. Property transfers. Statements they believed nobody would ever hear. Now the room echoed with their own words. Their own voices. Their own choices. There was nowhere left to hide. No. Vanessa whispered. But denial couldn't stop recordings. Couldn't erase evidence. Couldn't change reality. The screen displayed everything. The truth rarely arrives dramatically. Usually it arrives as facts. Cold. Simple. Impossible to argue with. Then came the final recording. The conversation from the previous night. The one discussing what needed to happen before I reached the attorney's office. The one that destroyed every remaining defense. As their voices filled the room, someone knocked at the front door. Once. Twice. Then the sound of multiple footsteps. Professional footsteps. Purposeful footsteps. The kind nobody mistakes. Police. Derek's shoulders collapsed. Not physically. Emotionally. I watched the exact moment he realized the game was over. The moment hope left his eyes. For months he believed I was powerless. For months he believed blindness made me weak. Now he understood something he should have known from the beginning. Vision was never my greatest strength. Patience was. The dining room doors opened. Detectives entered first. Then uniformed officers. Professional. Calm. Prepared. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody created a scene. Reality was already dramatic enough. One detective approached the table. Derek Lawson. The rest of the sentence barely mattered. Because everyone knew how it ended. Vanessa began crying. Quietly. Not because she regretted what she'd done. Because consequences had finally arrived. There is a difference. A very important difference. One deserves sympathy. The other deserves accountability. Derek looked at me one final time. Not with anger. Not even with hatred. with disbelief. As though he still couldn't understand how everything had unraveled. Maybe he never would. Maybe people like Derek spend their entire lives believing intelligence belongs only to the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the quietest. As officers escorted them away, Vanessa reached up instinctively toward her neck. Toward my mother's pearls. A detective stopped her. The necklace remained. Exactly where it belonged. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I had one. Because something precious had finally come home. The house became silent after they left. A strange silence. Not empty. Peaceful. Like a storm that had finally exhausted itself. Claire arrived 20 minutes later. Neither of us spoke immediately. We simply stood there. Looking at each other. Two women who had carried a secret together for weeks. Then she laughed. And suddenly I was laughing too. Not because anything was funny. Because relief sometimes sounds exactly like laughter. The legal process lasted months. Investigations continued. Financial records surfaced. Additional evidence emerged. The truth expanded far beyond what I originally suspected. But that chapter belongs to another story. What matters is this. The fortune remained protected. The estate remained mine. And my mother's legacy survived. 6 months later, I walked through the front doors of the house carrying the final box of Derek's remaining belongings. The property felt different now. Lighter. Healthier. Alive again. Most of the original staff had returned. The gardens flourished. The rooms no longer felt haunted. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's simply the absence of fear. One bright autumn morning, I stepped into the garage. A familiar car waited inside. The vintage convertible my mother adored. The same car Derek once joked he would inherit someday. I smiled at the memory. Then opened the driver's door. No cane. No dark glasses. No fear. Just sunlight. Freedom. And a road stretching endlessly ahead. I started the engine. The garage door opened. And for the first time in a very long time, I drove toward my future instead of away from my past. The funny thing about sight is that people think it begins with the eyes. It doesn't. Real sight begins the moment you stop believing the story someone else is telling you. The moment you trust what you know. The moment you refuse to ignore the truth. I lost my vision once. But what I almost lost was far more dangerous. My ability to see people clearly. And that was something I promised myself I would never surrender again.